Stars and Shadows is a 4X game from Ashdar Games. In many ways, Stars and Shadows feels like a spiritual successor to Master Orion 2. Fans of Orion 2 will find themselves very much at home with its fairly familiar style of gameplay to Orion. It is a turn-based 4X game, and like every other 4X game, it's about expanding your empire and crushing your opponents, which you'll do by expanding to new planets and improving your overall economic and military might. You can obtain victory in 3 different ways. You can either conquer everyone else, you can have an alliance with everyone else, or you can be elected by the council. There's 7 total playable factions in the game with their own unique mechanics and pros and cons. For example, the Ashdar Imperials begin with a Stargate, which can be used to instantaneously move ships from their homeworld to another planet. The Fidi Combine have citizens that generate more wealth, the Orthan Conference have bonuses towards science, humans start without a homeworld but have more colony ships to rapidly expand. All these races also have specific planet types that work best for them. Each of these mechanics and more really make each race feel very different than others, which gives the game great replayability. I found Stars and Shadows to be fairly straightforward as well to get into. It's an easy to understand game while not lacking complexity. There's several resources like money, production, food, metal, and research which you need to carefully balance to ensure economic success. Money is generated through taxes but also through trading, which can be automated by setting transport ships to automatically trade resources between your planets. Production is increased by building factories, which can allow you to produce ships faster. Research is increased by building more laboratories. Metal is a unique resource in that it's global and used in the production of starships, stations, ground troops, and more. Each planet also has a limited number of slots, which means that you have to really specialize them towards specific tasks. And you'll want to do that because some planets might be more beneficial to one another, or may have population that maybe benefits one or another. The research tree is fairly large and more or less what you would expect from a 4X game. You can either view it like a traditional tree or in a giant list. Some races also start and have gears towards specific technologies, incentivizing going towards them. Diplomacy is one of Stars and Shadows' weakest areas. It has the basics from declaring war, to trade treaties, to alliances, but it doesn't really do much more than that. You're also restricted through the influence mechanics. You only have a set amount of influence you can use to create special treaties and things. But really, it's just kind of a bare bones system. There's not much to it. It doesn't really feel like you're creating friends or friendships between different species, or real strong, cohesive alliances. There's also ship design in Stars and Shadows, but it's fairly simplistic and straightforward. You basically pick a ship class, which gives you a certain number of slots that you can fill out with different modules, like things like armor, or boarding options, or missiles, or lasers. But really, a lot of this is really limited to depending on what kind of technologies you research. It doesn't really feel like you can really create interesting or meaningful designs at all. Combat is another area I really felt lacked in Stars and Shadows. It's very reminiscent of Master of Orion 2, using an old 2D style like Orion in which you move ships around each turn. Ships can be moved and turned in certain directions to fire, but it doesn't really feel like you're making interesting or meaningful choices, and it really lacks the graphics and gameplay to really match it. There's just boring graphics, boring sounds that make combat really unexciting, and the UI is horrible. It doesn't do a very good job at telling you which ships have already taken their turns, how much they can do. It's just kind of clunky. Sometimes they'll even fire weapons and then you have to right click again just to fire twice. It's just silly and convoluted and doesn't really feel very well developed. And honestly, I found myself auto-resolving most of the battles that I played. From a graphics standpoint, Stars and Shadows looks decent outside of the battles. It's very cartoony though, even the text has a very comic book look, which I actually enjoyed quite a bit and found very refreshing compared to other 4X games. It's definitely unique at that. The soundtrack is alright, but it's nothing really great. It doesn't really get in the way, which is good, especially because it's very repetitive and minimalist. Overall, Stars and Shadows gets a 7 out of 10. It's a decent 4X game with a good foundation. If you loved Master of Orion 2, then I can highly recommend this game for you, as it feels very much like that. The entire experience is well built and enjoyable, but Stars and Shadows just doesn't do enough to really differentiate itself from its competition, and as a result, I kinda got tired of it pretty quickly. Like many 4X games, it relies very heavily on remaking and re-envisioning Master of Orion 2's classic gameplay, which isn't a bad thing if you really want something like that, but personally I was looking for something a little bit more unique and interesting, and as a result, this game just kinda skirts by at an average game.